Hello, I'm Tony Power, founder and principal consultant at Just Culture Consulting based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm joined again by Paul Stretton, one of the most innovative thinkers in the Just Culture space. Paul, how are you today?
I'm well, Tony. Thank you. It's good to see you. And before we get up and running on today's conversation, at the end of our last video, we introduced our upcoming Build Your Own Just Culture Masterclass, which we're launching in January 2025. I just want to remind viewers of that. So it's going to be a series of live online sessions with Tony and myself. And it's going to be designed and ideally focused on business owners, senior leaders, CEOs, C-suite, HR, people, culture leads in all industries. And the main focus is really going to be on how do we build a just culture framework that's suitable for your organization. So if it's for people that want to build a better working culture, a workplace culture in their organization, are looking to get the tools and expert help to get started, then hopefully this is going to be a really beneficial vehicle and time spent on that. And so if you're listening to this and think that's exactly what I need from the conversations we've had already, the ideas are really interesting. It's the direction we want to go into. How do we get started? How do we get up and running on that? Then register your interest at www.justculture.com.au/masterclass, and we'd love to hear from you. When the masterclass opens for enrollment, you'll be the first to know, and you'll be able to secure a spot. And in addition to registering your interest before we launch, to appreciate the fact that you've done that, you'll receive a special early bird discount so you can maximize your value for your attendance. Now, one of the facets with our masterclass is that we're only going to take a small number of participants. Multiple reasons for that. One being that we can make sure that then we give you the individual attention and support that you need to create those ideas for your workplace, allow for you to have that interaction and delve into the detail that is necessary for your implementation, your organization's those specific needs. That does mean, though, that spots are going to be strictly limited. So, and also given the nature of our work, we don't know yet when we're going to be able to run another masterclass, if we will be able to. So we do strongly encourage everybody to register for the masterclass when they get the opportunity, so that they don't miss out. And we'd look forward to working with you and putting these ideas into practice.
Yeah, Paul and I are really excited about this masterclass. We think it's going to be something that's really valuable to help kickstart your organization's cultural transformation, to boost productivity, reduce errors, improve staff retention, and promote excellence. We would hope to see you there. So, Paul, what's on the agenda for today?
Yeah, well, Tony, in our last video, we discussed a lot of the work that I've done in trying to create a revised kind of hybrid approach to just culture based on the other ideas around reason and Decker in particular. And you said lots of nice and positive things about this, which was, of course, was great for my ego, but hopefully it was beneficial for everybody else as well. And I think this conversation today is an opportunity for us to utilize all of your legal expertise, and we're going to explore the role of accountability in just culture. Now, this is something that we've mentioned, I think, so far on every video and every conversation that we've had. So clearly it's an important facet of a just culture approach, but it does come with some conflict. It does come with some disagreement. So we've got to try and navigate those murky waters a little bit. And so I suppose, Tony, to get us up and running, it might be helpful for us to agree on what we mean by accountability. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think you're quite right about talking about what we mean and getting some shared understanding on that as being really important. I think one of the biggest challenges in this conversation is that people will use words like blame and accountability, but they often mean different things by them, and it leads to people talking past each other and all sorts of confusion and debate. So I think if we first turn to the word blame, I think there are two elements of the word blame that can distinguish it from accountability. First, I think blame implies an assignment of a level of causation. The accident happened because you were speeding. Secondly, I think with blame, there's also a sense of moral condemnation to some degree. You shouldn't have been driving so fast. You should have driven within the speed limit. This then immediately leads us to limit learning because, well, we already know what the cause was. It was your fault. And it also leads us towards penalty. Well, you haven't behaved appropriately, and so you deserve a just and appropriate sanction. And of course, as we spoke back in our first video, it leads to errors and mistakes being hidden because of that fear of punishment. So then if we turn to the word accountability, now it's often used synonymously with blame. And I think part of the reason for that is that the accountability that's used in the legal system is very closely linked with those elements of blame that I just mentioned. If someone's property is damaged, the law looks for who caused that damage, holds them liable for it, and then requires the person to pay compensation. If the damage was deliberate, then the court will look for who did it, condemn that conduct, and apply a proportionate penalty. So legal accountability tends to look largely backwards in time, and it aims to do justice by treating people as they justly deserve. However, I think accountability, it doesn't have to be defined so narrowly. I would argue that even backwards-looking accountability doesn't necessarily need to be concerned with sanctions or punishment necessarily. If accountability is seen, for example, as a debt, like a responsibility to perform an outcome in exchange for payment, such as a salary, is the requirement to pay the debt or to perform to get salary punishment. Unless it's unfair or crushing in some way, I would argue not. So this kind of accountability is performance-based, and it's not about moral failure. A person might be trying really hard to succeed at their job, but maybe they're just not suitable for the role that they're in through no fault of their own.
Okay, just on that, Tony, I wonder, would it be reasonable as well to make the case that in that situation, it's still a just and fair response regarding the needs of the remainder of the team or the service users or whoever that might be. So it is an appropriate outcome nonetheless.
Yeah, and so I do think that accountability can take different forms. In a just culture, accountability, I think, becomes more about ownership and responsibility. Responsibility not always in the causation sense, but in the sense of duty and obligation, an obligation to explain and justify actions. And it can also accommodate accountability that is more forward-looking. Who has a duty to make things right when something's gone wrong, regardless of who might be at fault. A person can be accountable and take responsibility for things that go wrong without necessarily meaning that they have morally failed in some way. And so I would argue that just culture arguably expands accountability. The organisation and the leadership are accountable for the systems of work that they create, and the people within that system are accountable for the quality of their own actions. And so where there have been system failures, the organisation, to be accountable, has to recognise them, learn from them, and then make changes to improve those systems. It also, for the organisation, means recognising how those systems influence and constrain and facilitate individual behaviour, and taking account of that. And then for the people in the system, accountability for committing to take responsibility for the quality of their choices and also for individual learning.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tony. And I wonder, from what you've said and from our previous conversations, we've looked at how different ideas around just culture focus on forward-looking accountability or backwards-looking accountability. And I wonder how helpful really that distinction is when we're trying to create and apply these ideas around just culture. And that brings me back to your legal expertise, because legal systems try to apply both of these ideas about forward-looking and backwards-looking. So how do they do that? And how do they do it effectively in your experience? Or when is the balance not necessarily being struck as you think it would be ideal?
I do think it's a bit of a mixed picture. I think a broader conception of accountability can be challenging in the legal sphere and beyond it. I was meeting with someone the other day who's in disability care, and their organisation a couple of years ago had a serious incident, and it attracted a lot of media attention and also attention from the regulator. And as a result of that, the organization massively increased the number and detail of their work procedures and compliance measures. And compliance became very punitive. It was sort of a one-step foot wrong, boom, and you're gone type approach. Now, the new CEO is trying to change that. They're trying to go in a more just culture direction, which I think is great. But perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest challenge is coming from the organization's lawyers and HR and from the regulator with the sort of, well, aren't you just kind of trying to let people off the hook type questions? And I think the response to that then is to say that just culture is not a get out of jail free card. It takes accountability very seriously, but it anchors it in the science of how humans perform work and in systems thinking. And so it can hold individuals accountable for actions that are malicious or reckless, and it can hold organizations accountable for the systems of work that they design.
Yeah, I think that last point in particular, Tony, about organizational accountability is something that is often lacking in these conversations. And whether that's about being responsible for the conditions, for the instance, such as when we talked about in the previous videos about the Volkswagen case, or maybe how organizations have resourced and designed the system itself and been accountable for that. And I think that's why, personally, I think founding our thoughts on a genuine curiosity and humility as to why decisions made sense at the time is really quite important, and hopefully lead us to a broader application of this, the ideas around accountability.
And of course, we don't want to replace, scapegoating the front line with scapegoating individual managers. When they're making decisions around designing those systems of work, likewise, we have to recognize their constraints and that they are going to be likely doing, what makes sense to them at the time. Having said all of that, I do think one area where just culture can take something from the legal system is that on rare but very real occasions, not just accountability, but even blame, it can be actually appropriate. Where an individual does act maliciously, as we've mentioned before, an organization can open itself up to legal liability and also seriously risk damaging the morale of other staff who are not engaging in that malicious behavior if the organization fails to condemn and sanction it. Now, in the legal sphere, if a court is engaging in sentencing, they would impose an outcome, and they would be seeking to balance, on the one hand, punishment, so what is deserved based on the offence, which is a sort of backward-looking, protection of the community if there's a risk of the behaviour being repeated, which is obviously again is forward-looking, deterrence to deter that person and others from that behaviour, forward-looking, and rehabilitation to assist the person to do better in future and to restore them into the community, which is also forward-looking. But one of the challenges for courts is that they have limited options provided by government to achieve these outcomes. Organisations, on occasion, they may, like society at large, have to protect themselves and the community from the risks posed by the malicious and the hapless. But they have the advantage of having more options available to them, such as restorative justice processes, systems changes, and things like training.
So does that lead us then to a position where we should really be very cautious about some of the debates we have around just culture being framed around things like, you've got to pick a team on this, maybe it's not as easy as just grasping at a slogan like you can learn or blame, but you can't do both, or blame fixes nothing, which we see a lot of in a lot of discourse at the moment. And actually, to develop a true just culture, we've got to be very mindful about the full spectrum of the relationships with accountability, and how do we then ensure that they're all as healthy as possible.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's about maintaining that accountability, but making that accountability very, very targeted and embedded in that context and systems thinking.
That's a lot more nuanced approach and uncomfortable than just grasping a slogan, but I think that's probably an appropriate place to end our conversation for today, Tony. So thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us. If you like this video, and please obviously do share it and add any comments. If there's anything that you'd like us to discuss in the future, we'd be very happy to hear from you as well. After hearing about Just Culture, if you think, I want this in my organization, how do I implement it? The topic of our next conversation will be exactly that. How do we take all of these ideas and put them into practice? And we'll try and identify some good practice and some of the common traps that people fall into when trying to move in this direction. So we'll look forward to speaking with you then, Tony, on how do we put all these principles into practice. So thank you, and have a great day, everybody. See you next time.